Real medieval battles were not scenes of glory or chivalry. They were brutal, filthy, and terrifying struggles for survival. When two armies met, order collapsed within minutes. The ground shook with the noise of clashing steel, shouting men, and dying horses. Thick dust and smoke filled the air, turning daylight into darkness. Soldiers could barely see or breathe. There were no clean duels or heroic speeches, only chaos, fear, and pain. Every swing of a sword could miss or hit a friend. Armor became heavy, hands trembled from exhaustion, and men slipped on mud soaked with blood. Commands were lost in the roar of battle, and formations broke apart as panic spread. Many fighters never saw their killer. The lucky ones died quickly. The rest faced wounds, infection, or capture. Movies show honor and victory, but real medieval warfare was about endurance. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion claimed more lives than swords. For those who survived, the memories of what they saw stayed forever. The reality of these battles was not heroic. It was human suffering on an unimaginable scale. Number 1. The brutal reality of medieval warfare. Real medieval battles were far more chaotic and terrifying than any movie shows. Soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder in crushing crowds where movement was limited and confusion ruled every second. Visibility through helmets was poor, and most fighters could barely recognize friend from foe. When two armies collided, it wasn't about honor or skillful swordplay. It was a violent surge of men screaming, pushing, and striking blindly. The noise of steel hitting shields mixed with the cries of the wounded. Dust and smoke from fires and gunpowder filled the air, turning daylight into a gray haze. The ground quickly became slick with blood and mud. Once a man slipped, getting up was almost impossible. Many died not from wounds, but from suffocation and trampling under heavy boots. The sound of metal clanging against armor never stopped. Commanders had almost no control once the lines met. Messengers could not be heard through the roar, and banners that were meant to signal orders disappeared in the chaos. In these brutal clashes, discipline often collapsed within minutes. Soldiers focused on survival, swinging wildly or using broken weapons, rocks, and even fists. Fear spread faster than courage. If one section broke, others followed, creating a deadly chain reaction of panic. Cavalry charges, which movies present as glorious, often turned disastrous when frightened horses slipped on corpses or crashed into friendly lines. The battlefield after the fight was worse. Bodies of men and animals lay tangled together. The cries of the dying echoed for hours as scavengers stripped armor and weapons. Real medieval warfare was not heroic or clean. It was suffocating, filthy, and ruled by confusion and fear. Survival depended not on skill alone, but on luck and the will to keep standing in a storm of steel and chaos. Number 2. The heavy burden of armor. Real medieval armor was not the effortless protection that movies often show. A full set of plate weighed around 30 kilograms, and although the weight was distributed, it demanded extreme strength and endurance. Every movement became slower and heavier. Breathing was harder inside the helmet, where air felt hot and stale. Sweat poured under the layers of metal and padding, turning the fighter's clothing into a furnace. After only a few minutes of battle, exhaustion built up so quickly that even trained knights struggled to stay upright. Armor did not make a soldier invincible. It protected against slashing cuts, but crushing weapons like warhammers or maces could still cause broken ribs or concussions through the steel. Many knights suffered internal bleeding without a single visible wound. The constant pressure of metal on the body caused bruises and deep chafing. When soldiers fell, getting up again was difficult, especially in mud or on uneven ground. Some drowned in puddles or suffocated under other fallen men. Vision was another major problem. Through a narrow visor slit, the world became a small rectangle of chaos. Fighters had to turn their whole heads to see attacks from the side. Communication almost disappeared. Shouting inside a metal helmet muffled voices, and soldiers often missed orders during the noise of battle. Even hearing the sound of incoming enemies was difficult. Maintaining armor was a full-time job. Every piece had to be cleaned, oiled, and repaired after combat. Rust or loose straps could mean death in the next fight. Knights carried servants or squires, whose main duty was to check rivets, adjust straps, and polish the surface. Movies often show armor as a symbol of honor and beauty. In truth, it was heavy, suffocating, and painfully demanding. For medieval soldiers, the shining plates that promised safety also became an iron cage that tested endurance and willpower every moment on the battlefield. Number 3. Arrows, crossbows, and early guns. In real medieval warfare, the most dangerous phase often began long before swords clashed. Armies opened battles with terrifying waves of arrows and crossbow bolts that filled the sky. Thousands of projectiles rained down at once, striking shields, armor, and exposed flesh. The sound was like a storm. The sharp whistle of arrows mixed with the heavy thuds of impacts. Soldiers looked up only to see death falling toward them. Even strong plate armor could not fully protect against the force of concentrated volleys. Gaps at the neck, joints, and face were weak points that experienced archers knew how to target. Crossbows were slower, but far more powerful. Their bolts could punch through chainmail and pierce wooden shields. Many armies relied on crossbowmen because they required less training than longbow archers. A single shot from a crossbow could change the balance of a fight. The psychological effect was also devastating. Soldiers often heard the heavy click of crossbows loading just before a deadly silence, then a sudden wave of bolts that tore into ranks without mercy. As technology advanced, early handguns entered the field. They were crude, slow, and often unreliable, but their loud explosion terrified men and animals alike. The sound of gunfire echoed across battlefields, creating panic among troops who had never faced such weapons. Thick smoke from gunpowder covered the area, making it hard to see and breathe. Arrows and bullets did more than wound. They broke formations, blinded horses, and destroyed morale. A single well-timed volley could collapse entire lines of infantry. Battles turned into chaos as men dropped shields to cover their heads and horses bolted in fear. The constant noise, smoke, and blood made medieval warfare a nightmare. Movies show arrows as dramatic visuals, but in reality they brought confusion, terror, and mass death long before the swords ever met. Number 4. The Nightmare of Sieges. In medieval warfare, the most horrifying battles were not fought in open fields, but around castle walls. Sieges could last for weeks or even months, turning entire cities into prisons. Inside the walls, civilians rationed food, ate animals, and sometimes resorted to desperate measures to survive. Disease spread quickly as waste and corpses piled up. The smell of rot and smoke filled the air. Every day was filled with hunger, fear, and the constant sound of enemy machines pounding the walls. Outside, besieging armies built massive wooden towers, trenches, and catapults. Soldiers worked day and night under arrows and boiling water to dig tunnels beneath walls, hoping to make them collapse. Trebuchets hurled huge stones that smashed into fortifications, sending dust and debris flying through the streets. Sometimes they launched rotting animal carcasses or infected corpses to spread sickness inside. Defenders responded with crossbow fire, burning oil, and quicklime that blinded and suffocated attackers. Both sides lived in filthy conditions. Rain turned camps into swamps. Food rotted. Fires spread easily through wooden siege works. Disease didn't choose sides, killing attackers as often as defenders. The longer the siege lasted, the weaker morale became. Deserters risked execution, and starving soldiers often turned on their own comrades for food. When a wall finally fell, the true horror began. Armies stormed through the breaches, killing anyone in their path. Looting, burning, and revenge consumed the city. Churches filled with terrified civilians offered no safety. The screams of women, children, and the wounded echoed through narrow streets. For survivors, rebuilding could take years. Fields burned, trade stopped, and famine followed. Movies often skip this reality, but the nightmare of sieges was the darkest side of medieval warfare. It was slow, cruel, and far deadlier than any heroic battle shown on screen. Number 5. The invisible power of logistics. Behind every medieval victory stood something most movies never show: supply. Armies did not live on courage alone. They lived on bread, water, and animal feed. Without supplies, even the strongest knights and bravest soldiers collapsed. Commanders planned campaigns around harvest seasons because food determined when an army could move. If rain destroyed the crops or wagons got stuck in mud, entire operations failed before a single arrow was fired. Feeding thousands of men and horses every day was a nightmare. Armies carried flour, salt, and dried meat in wagons that moved slowly along rough dirt roads. When supplies ran out, soldiers raided villages and stole from civilians. Hunger caused fights within camps, and diseases spread from spoiled food and dirty water. The smell of rot followed every army, making it clear how fragile survival really was. Logistics also meant maintenance. Armor needed oil, weapons needed sharpening. Horses required shoes and rest. Blacksmiths, cooks, tailors, and carpenters were as important as knights. Without them, armies literally fell apart. Commanders had to manage payment too. Mercenaries refused to fight without wages. Many wars stopped not because of peace treaties, but because treasuries went empty. Weather made everything worse. Heavy rain washed away roads and flooded supply wagons. Winter froze rivers, blocking routes. Summer heat spoiled food and weakened men inside their armor. Every march had to be planned with these risks in mind. The success of a medieval army depended less on bravery and more on organization. In the end, logistics was the silent force that decided who lived and who starved. Real medieval warfare was not just blood and steel. It was accounting, timing, and survival. When supplies broke down, even the mightiest armies crumbled long before reaching the battlefield. Number 6. The aftermath and trauma. When the fighting ended, the real horror of medieval warfare began. The battlefield was covered with bodies, broken armor, and the cries of the dying. Many soldiers who survived the clash did not live through the night. Infection spread quickly through open wounds. Without antibiotics or clean tools, even a small cut could become fatal. Surgeons used wine and fire to clean injuries, often causing unbearable pain. Amputations were done on the spot, with knives heated over flames to stop bleeding. The smell of blood, smoke, and rot stayed in the air for days. After victory or defeat, armies stripped the dead of armor and weapons. Steel was valuable, and even fallen comrades were looted. Horses lay side by side with men, and their carcasses drew swarms of flies. The surviving soldiers rarely celebrated. They were exhausted, traumatized, and hungry. Many had seen friends crushed or burned alive. The emotional toll was immense, though medieval people had no word for trauma. They called it battle madness, or said the warrior spirit had turned cold. Some veterans returned home silent and unstable, unable to work or sleep. Civilians suffered as much as the soldiers. Villages near the battlefield faced disease from unburied corpses and ruined farmlands. Crops burned, rivers were poisoned, and famine often followed. The cost of war lasted for years. Families searched for missing relatives, while others sold their land to pay ransoms for captured loved ones. Priests and monks spent days burying the dead in mass graves, often without names. Movies end with victory and glory, but real medieval wars ended in silence and despair. The aftermath was filled with pain, loss, and destruction. For those who survived, every battle left invisible scars that lasted a lifetime. The true horror of medieval warfare began only after the fighting stopped.